This week, we're going to go over scripting FMOD events. Now, this does involve using the C# scripting language, so I'm going to go over a brief overview right now, and we're going to work on it in class. I will try and make this as easy and painless as possible. So, you already know how to use the FMOD Studio listener to add that to your camera or your player object, and how to add the Studio event emitter to game objects. Those are effectively dumb though. They play loops or one-shots until they're destroyed, and that's about it. Fortunately, Unity uses C# to script actions for various objects as functions. This means that we can edit those scripts and insert our own code to trigger FMOD events based on the actions that are happening in the game. So you fire your gun, and every time you fire, it creates an event that does something cool sounding. And every time an enemy is hit with your gun's projectiles, they make a noise and die. So to illustrate this, I've already put scripts and a code cheat sheet up on Moodle called Unity and FMOD Event Triggers. Take a look at that. There's a lot of stuff in there, but we'll go over it. It's not that much. You just have to know where to insert it. Scripting in C#, which we don't have time to really get into in depth, is really pretty easy. There's a really good intro available at the link I've put up that is done by Unity, and it's really, really good to go over that and review it if you have time. As we talked about last week, Unity installs Microsoft Visual Studio. I'm not much of a fan. I prefer VS Code. Yes, they're both made by Microsoft. Yes, I know, but I just think it's a little bit less cluttered and easy to work with. Again, you can switch over to whatever code editor you want by going to Edit, Preferences, External Tools, and then setting that in the external script editor. So for scripting in C#, we're not going to talk about how to actually create different C# scripts for every type of action. You can find a lot of those on GitHub already. Autocomplete, however, is going to be your friend. So make sure that you have autocomplete turned on in whatever editor you're using. And again, don't worry, we will be doing this every day this week in class, showing you exactly what to type, where to insert it, and of course you can copy some of this from the examples that I put up on the course page. So let's do the basic one-shot. This is really easy. This is in a script. You would insert the following wherever you want the one-shot to be triggered. So if you go into the scripts that I put up there, you've got the FirstPersonController.cs file. This is really simple. You just have to insert the line. You don't have to declare variables. You don't have to initialize anything. It's just insert this line into a function. And that line is fmod unity.runtimemanager.play one-shot, and then you're going to give it a string. So you open up quotes, event, colon, /, and then you'll give it the path to your event. And guess what? In FMOD, if you just open up FMOD and you right-click on an event, you can copy the path. So you copy the path of whatever event in FMOD, and then you can just paste it here between the quotation marks. No fuss. That's it. Super easy. I do that all the time. I don't recommend actually trying to type this in manually. Just copy the path from FMOD. Anyway, make sure that it closes the quotes, closes the parentheses, and that you terminate that line with a semicolon or it will not work. That's important. What this does is it calls the runtime manager for FMOD, and it just tells it, play an event when this function is triggered. And then because it's a one-shot, the event is played all the way through without being cut off or repeated. That's it. It's a one-shot. However, for every other type of FMOD instance that we're going to use, you're going to need to first declare a variable. These are done at the very, very, very top of the code, after all the include stuff, after the mono behavior line. So go right to the top under mono behavior, and you'll probably see a bunch of things like private, public, and protected. Just add a new line at the end of those, and this is where you would insert your variables. We're going to use private variables, which means that they are only accessible within the class. They're not shared with Unity, which would be a public variable. You can use those too, and they are not restricted to only the same class and script, which is protected variables. Private is generally the best option for what we're going to do. So to do that, you just add the line private fmod.studio.eventInstance, and then you give the variable a name. I used Sentry Drone Alert because I was going through a tutorial on how to make a basic first-person shooter game. That will create the variable whenever the game is run, and it will tell it that it's going to store an FMOD Studio event instance to that variable. Next, what we need to do is to load that instance, and then we need to trigger that instance by calling it within the triggering function. So how do we do that? Well, we've got our variable Sentry Drone Alert already. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down to a place in the code that we can load it. You could either put it in the triggering function, or you could put it in the start function. Generally, you're going to put these in the start function, but you might need to put them in the triggering function depending on what you're doing. So to do that, you would just go into the function that you're going to load the event instance in, give it the variable. So here it's Sentry Drone Alert, then space equals space fmodunity.runtimemanager.createInstance, and then we're just going to give it an event. So again, go into fmod, right-click on the event that you want to load in there, copy path, and then paste that in. Make sure that it's inside parentheses, open quotations, then paste your event in there, close the quotations, close the parentheses, and terminate it with a semicolon. Pretty cool. If we're using anything that has, say, 3D attributes, where we're going to use runtime utils to calculate pitch and volume changes based on proximity to the player, then what we're going to do is we're going to do another line right below the loading of the variable. So here I've got the variable Sentry Drone Alert. Now I'm going to use .syntax to access the 3D attributes. So Sentry Drone Alert .set 3D attributes. I'm going to open my parentheses, and this is where I'm actually telling it what I'm going to set. So fmodunity.runtimeutils.toThreeD attributes, open parentheses, game object, and then close both sets of parentheses and terminate it with a semicolon. So now that's automatically going to use the runtime utils in fmod to calculate pitch and volume changes based on the object's distance to the player. Last thing I need to do is I need to start the instance. This can be whenever something is created, or it can be when something is triggered using a different function. So if this was in a trigger function, it would just be put in there. It could be put under the start. It could be anywhere where you want the instance to actually happen. So all you do is you take the variable, take the name of the variable, add .start, and then open and close parentheses with nothing in between. So that third line of code, Sentry Drone Alert, .start, blank parentheses, and then terminate with a semicolon. Now that starts it, but it doesn't stop it. So what we're going to need to do to stop it is somewhere else, usually in, say, the destroy function. We would have that same variable name, and then we're going to use the stop message to it. So Sentry Drone Alert .stop, open parentheses, Then we're going to access FMOD with fmod.studio.stopMode.allow fade out, close parentheses, semicolon to terminate. This tells it that whenever we stop the object, we're going to let FMOD keep playing, and it's just going to fade out. And it will trail off to nothing. Good. There is another option, though. Instead of using stopMode.allFadeOut, we can do stopMode.immediate, which means that as soon as we send it the stop message, the sound will cut off wherever it is. Does not matter. That can be useful. It can be kind of a hindrance. Usually you're probably going to use allow fade out, but if you really need something to immediately stop, .immediate. Then we are going to need to release the variable. So this will typically be a line that will immediately follow the .stop message. And it's really easy. You just take variable, .release, and then you give it a set of parentheses with nothing in between. And then again, terminate it with a semicolon. Like I said, it will usually be immediately after the .stop method, but not always. You might want to have it occur somewhere else, like if it's stopping based on a condition of proximity, so that you're not cycling through tons and tons of CPU usage, but that you only want it released when the object is destroyed, then you would put it under the destroy function for the object. So just think about where you're going to put those. Like I said, usually I find that it's .stop, then .release on the next line, but not always. Let's talk about parameters a little bit. Parameters in FMOD are assignable, and they're how we use different types of modulation. So you can create parameters in FMOD that will modulate the sound of an event, and it's really easy to do. In the timeline, there is a little plus box in a tab next to that. Click on that, and that will add a new parameter. And there's a bunch of built-in types that are going to use the listener and emitter objects in Unity to calculate their values and don't need any coding. So distance will calculate the distance from the source emitter to the listener. Direction will calculate the horizontal angle of the source to the listener. Elevation is the vertical angle of the source to the listener. Event cone angle is the horizontal angle of the listener from the source. And event orientation is the angle difference between the front of the listener and the source. You're probably going to use distance or direction the most. So create a parameter, and it will create a named number box of that parameter. And we will look at this in class quite a bit because it's a lot of fun. But then you can add effects to the master track and right-click to add automation to it. And then in the parameter, we can start editing that automation. So let's do something really basic in class, like we'll add an EQ and then change the frequency. Inside of the parameter lane, we can add a breakpoint at the start and then add another one further down at a lower value. And then we can test by playing the event and moving the number box to go through different values. We can adjust the values using the diamond between the breakpoints to adjust the curve and just kind of really dial everything in. We can also script parameters and change them in the script by using .setParametersByName and using that method. But first you need to create a variable that will store an FMOD instance like we've already done. So to use setParameterByName, once again, you need to declare a variable at the start of the code. So take a look at the aircraftsounds.cs file that I've included on the course page. And right under mono behavior, we've got private fmod.studio.eventInstance, and we're going to call it aircraft engine. So that creates an instance that stores an FMOD event. Then in the start function, I have that variable, aircraft engine, equals fmodunity.runtimemanager .create instance. And then once again, in FMOD, I got my path by going to the event, right-clicking on it, and then copying path. I insert it into the parentheses, open quotes, just paste it in, close my quotes, close my parentheses, and semicolon to terminate. Then, because this is starting as soon as the object is created, that's going to happen in the start function, so I just go directly on the next line, aircraft engine.start. Parentheses open, nothing in between, close parentheses, terminate with a semicolon. You could start it inside another function, but again, like I said, this is starting immediately when the object is created, so it's in the start function. Then, in the update function is going to be running repeatedly in the background and is going to have the purpose of updating things as things change. So what I'm doing is I'm taking that instance in the aircraft speed variable, and I'm saying, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a way to use this variable that it will edit the sound of the engine. So I load that as GameObject.getComponent, rigid body, and then velocity.magnitude. So I'm using that to get essentially the speed factor of a game object that it's attached to. In this case, it's going to be the aircraft itself. Then I'm going to go back to my FMOD instance, aircraft engine, that variable, and I'm going to access that with .setParameter by name, and then the parameter name in FMOD is vehicle speed, so I put that in quotes because it's a string, close my quotes, then add a comma after the close quotes. I know that is not proper English. That's how you do it in scripting. And now I'm feeding it that aircraft speed variable. Close my parentheses and then terminate that with a semicolon. So what that's doing is it's taking the speed of the aircraft and it's using that, scaling that by velocity and magnitude, and passing that data to the vehicle speed parameter within FMOD. And it's using that to change the filtering that's been set up. I realize that is a lot of stuff that I've just dumped on you. So we will look at this in class in detail. We'll dissect my code. We will look at how to create that in your own as well. But take a look at the sheet that I gave you. And one thing, just to make sure that you are doing this already, back up your code before you edit it. Make a backup. It costs nearly nothing in terms of hard drive resources to create a backup of the C# script before you start editing them. In case something goes wrong, you always want to have a working backup. So make sure you are saving frequently and back up as soon as you make a major change that works. Constantly do that. Save, save, save. Control S, Command S. That should be instinctive. But again, take a look at the code, and we will look at this in class and explore how to use parameters and basic scripting of different FMOD events in your code as well. So come with questions and ideas as to where to put the code.